So who wants to get into the oil business? Wow. Landman, which starts Sunday on Paramount Plus, takes us under the hood of the oil rig business in West Texas. It's created by Taylor Sheridan and Christian Wallace. And here to discuss it, we have Billy Bob Thornton, the actor, filmmaker, writer of scripts and song, and singer as well. He's got an Oscar on his mantle for writing Sling Blade, which he also starred in and got an Oscar nomination for that. His standout work includes All the Pretty Horses, A Simple Plan, Monsters Ball, Primary Colors, Bad Santa, Love Actually, and Friday Night Lights. And he was Emmy nominated for the series the series transfer of Fargo and Goliath. So please welcome the extraordinary Billy Bob Thornton.
Yeah.
So what did you all think of what you saw? So Billy Bob, we just watched 2 episodes in which your character, Tommy Norris, was nearly killed by drug traffickers, manages an accident in which a tractor trailer collides with a plane smuggling coke or heroin, and then has to bury his friends who were blown up beyond recognition in an explosion that almost killed his son. And then he has to go and settle up with those people. He's managing an ex-wife he clearly still wants to be with, and he has to manipulate his gorgeous young daughter into a breakup with an immature football player she thinks is her future. And he cuts off half of his own finger because he has no time to heal. This is as entertaining as hell based on the podcast series Boomtown from Imperative Entertainment and Texas Monthly. So we know these fixer guys exist. What did you find out about these guys? And why do they do what they do, and what feels like just about the hardest and most unsatisfying job this side of hauling crab traps in Alaska?
You know what, Mike? That was the longest question I've ever been asked. First of all, thank you guys for coming out. That's awesome. Well, you know what? A landman is exhausted all the time. And all the things you just talked about, that was my childhood, so, it was easy. No, when I was presented this thing by Taylor, I did a cameo in his show 1883, and Taylor called me up and he said, I wrote a cameo, and once I looked at it, I realized that I needed somebody who had done this before. And so can you come to Fort Worth for a night and shoot up everybody in the saloon and leave? And I said, yes, I can. And at the premiere of that, of 1883 in Las Vegas, I sat next to him at the dinner afterward. He said, I'm writing a series called Landman for you, and I'm going to write it in your voice, and it's set in the oil business, and it's basically you if you were a landman. And he described to me what a landman was, which I knew a little bit about, but not everything. And it sounded really good to me because I think as an actor, you have to put a lot of yourself into a part. Yeah. You can't, I don't like to pretend, in other words, you know what I mean? Because acting is supposed to be natural, and that's why sometimes in acting classes, I always had a little problem with if you're in Santa Monica and you want to go to, say, Torrance, you don't need to go to Glendale to get to Torrance, yeah. And I didn't understand shadow boxing and, all that kind of stuff. And so the idea is to be natural. He wrote it for me, and I said, yeah, I think I like this. I'd like to do it. I'd never heard anything since Giant about the oil business, And you guys know the movie Giant. You know, it was awesome, right? And I loved that movie, and I thought this could be an even more dangerous version of Giant. And I agreed to it immediately, and I'd seen some of Taylor's work, and it was kind of a no-brainer for me to do this.
So you said yes before he showed you the script?
Yes, I did.
Wow.
I did. I've only done that twice. The other time was for a movie called The Man Who Wasn't There by the Coen brothers. And they called me up and said, "Hey, you want to be a barber in 1949? I said, "Yes, I do."
Simple as that. Well, you know, so you go and, I would imagine, research and meet these guys and get a sense of what they do and how they do it. It doesn't sound like the kind of job that you would take for anything other than money, or is it? What draws these people to do this incredibly dangerous job?
Well, as far as the people who actually work in the oil fields, you know, the ones who work on these pump jacks and these rigs, a lot of them are people who are sometimes uneducated, and some of them are ex-cons. They couldn't make $180,000 a year anywhere else. So they go do these dangerous things to take care of their families, and they'll risk life and limb to take care of their families for that kind of money, because otherwise they're working in a menial job somewhere. And as far as a landman goes, the backstory of Monty, who is played by John Hamm, he owns the oil company, but we were old friends. These are things you'll all find out later. Anyway, so, but they knew each other, were buddies, and one went this way, one went that way. It's like Angels with Dirty Faces with Jimmy Cagney and Pat O'Brien. And so it's a weird relationship because I end up working for my friend, who's my boss, which, it's a little uncomfortable. Yeah. But the reason you go into this is because you have an opportunity to make money, but it's a gamble. Mm. And ultimately it becomes a thing that you're obsessed with. It gets in your blood because you're pulling stuff out of the ground that we run our world on. And by the way, this, as you can see, this is not like a preaching thing about oil is awesome. It's the ins and outs, ups and downs, the good, the bad, and the ugly of the oil business. It's not politicized or anything like that. It just shows what happens. Yeah. But in terms of the landman character, you're basically a glorified foreman. And so you get this job because your friend says, "Hey, would you run this thing for me?" Well, the landman is in charge of not only making money for his boss, which is a huge gamble, and you're in charge of making sure it happens, but you're also protecting the workers out there in the fields and also making sure they do the job so you can get the money to your boss. A landman drives 300 to 600 miles a day sometimes and has to go check all these rigs, report to the boss, and in the meantime, you have this eccentric family who's circling around you, and he has the weight of the world on his shoulders. It's an exhausting job. It's exhausting to make this, and it's really exhausting to actually be one. Yeah.
Well, now you didn't take a straight path to stardom. You started out, you wanted to be a baseball player. You worked a whole bunch of jobs to get where you are. What job did you have that came closest to the character that you play?
Well, I was hauling hay. I was raised in Arkansas and Texas, and my first job was stamping cans at a grocery store for the best friend of my father, and I was in junior high school still. But he happened to own a farm, and so I hauled hay in the afternoons. I thought that was horrible, until I worked at a machine shop and then a sawmill and then hauled heavy equipment in Houston and ran a backhoe. I'd say the sawmill. The sawmill was the worst thing I probably ever did. It was frightening, and there was an old joke that we used to have about sawmill workers, which was, you know what this is? That's a sawmill worker ordering 5 beers.
Well, you seem to have all 10 fingers, so...
I got out with my limbs, yes, I did.
You got out of there.
Yeah.
And so, most of us, we fill up the tank. Maybe we get into arguments over global warming and fossil fuels. But I never really considered how the oil gets there and the dangers and headaches and vast fortunes involved in getting it out of the ground. Talk about that a little and how that will play into... because it feels inevitable that we're going to learn some stuff about how it all works and the viability of renewable energy and all this stuff. What makes this show pop is the interplay between your character and his ex-wife and his daughter, who is trying to sort of figure out her place in the world, and his son. And to talk a little bit about those dynamics. And it just looks like an awful lot of fun what you're doing. And your character seems to be maybe the smartest guy in the show. All the lessons learned from mistakes that he's made in his life. But give me a sense as to the things that you liked about that whole dysfunctional family dynamic. And you say you put yourself into it. And, talk about that a little as to how you made this fit like a glove for you.
Well, when Taylor told me he was writing it specifically for me and that he said, look, I've gotten to know you since the cameo you did for me in 1883. He said, I'm writing this for you. I have your voice. And when I read it, I go, boy, you sure do, don't you? And I believe as an actor that no matter what you're playing, you don't want to pretend. You don't want to do an imitation. I was asked to play Richard Nixon one time, and I was like, what? Didn't make sense to me. I would have to do an imitation. Yeah. And I was also asked to play Vince Lombardi, the football coach. And I was like, well, you need to get a shorter, stockier Italian guy from New York. I'm not the guy. We have, for instance, if you're doing a movie about Texas, we have plenty of Texans. We have plenty of people from Arizona, plenty of people from New York. So you don't need to get Australian guys here to do that. Or British men or women, And if you're going to do Winston Churchill's story, get a British guy. He'll do better than I do because I'll have to learn an accent, and all I'll be doing the whole time is thinking about the accent. And if you notice when people do that, they enunciate way too much. If you're going to do the Charles de Gaulle story, get a Frenchman. He'll be way better than I am at it. But if you are going to do a movie about Dallas or San Antonio or Birmingham, Alabama, or New Jersey, we don't need a British guy to do it. We got plenty of guys from New Jersey, plenty of girls from New Jersey, got plenty of girls who are cowgirls from Dallas. So we got it all set. Now, back to the thing about the family dynamic. I'm sorry, I suffer from an anxiety disorder, so I talk a lot. Anyway, so that's the thing about this show. In this family dynamic, it's a very eccentric family. And Allie Larder, who plays my ex-wife, she and I have a very interesting relationship. And the daughter, who's played by Michelle Randolph, who's awesome, I have a great chemistry with her because my daughter, who's 20, is in Cal Poly right now, up the road here in San Luis Obispo. And I didn't have to do any research to be protective of her. And then my son, Jacob, I mean, what's the first thing you do? When your son's standing on the coffee table and he falls and cuts his lip open, the first feeling is anger because why did you do that? You know, but then 2 seconds later, it's like, oh my God, my son's lip's open, you know. So he wants to be in the oil business. And I'm trying to say, just like many of us have said, don't get in the movie business, it ain't easy. And so that dynamic in this show, I think, is actually the heart of it. I think that is what it is. This is a story about a family. And we happen to be in the oil business, or I do, and it's how it affects people and how, you know, whatever business we're in, there's something about that that's going to impact everybody in that family. The great thing is that Taylor injected it with some humor, and I can't help that, you know, whatever I play. It's like everything needs to have humor in it.
Yes.
And this family is very humorous and crazy and eccentric and everything else. But, you know, I think sometimes dramas are a little over earnest, so they expect you to, if it's this is about this very heavy subject. So it turns into Days of Our Lives because, nothing wrong with Days of Our Lives. I used to watch it, but, yeah. Yeah. Oh, I was all into Luke and Laura, all that stuff. Yeah. But the thing is the only thing about soap operas is that how can you be that melancholy all day long, every day? Don't you ever just say, hey, pass the salt? It's like, oh, dude, you wouldn't believe what I saw today, you know? People do that. We all have joy, pain, sadness, elation, melancholy, and we all have humor. And these days, sometimes critics will say about a movie, if it has humor and drama and all the various things that we all go through every day, the critic will say, it can't make its mind up what it is. It's like, that's to say that life can't make its mind up what it is, you know, because in life we have all of those things. So, you know, go back through the old movies, watch them. They all have all of it. And I think that these days we've gotten a little precious with ourselves and, you know, just watch stuff and watch people behave, you know. And this family is kind of interesting, at least for me to watch. And you've probably, I don't know, they've seen 2 episodes, right?
2 episodes.
Anyway, Taylor and I had a great working relationship. We really did.
And one last thing I wanted to ask, the dynamic, and you sort of touched on it with between your character and John Hamm's character. They're friends. One of them now owns the oil company, but there have been some incredible tragedies that happened in those first 2 episodes, which we saw. There's got to be a temptation for John Hamm's character. It would be easy for him to throw his friend under the bus. Talk a little bit about that whole dynamic and what where that's headed over these all the episodes that Demi Moore has seen.
That's awesome, Mike. Well, let's just put it this way. If you had the money to build a house, I mean, to start from scratch and build a house, but you didn't want to hire some, you know, big company to do it, but you had this buddy who knew how to build a house. That's why John's character needs me, because I know how to be a fixer. Yeah. And he knows that. Plus, he had a trust fund, and I didn't. But yeah, it's that he knows he needs a guy like me because he knew me forever, you know. And I know that he knows how to run business, which I'm not big on, you know. So that's really the relationship. But, you can imagine how that would be, like I said earlier, if like you came up with somebody, you knew them very well, and all of a sudden they're your boss.
Yeah, it's awkward.
I mean, imagine your friend is your boss all of a sudden. I mean, that makes for a weird dynamic. Yeah, and every time I walk into his mansion, I'm like, oh, well, how come I don't have this? Yeah.
Well, I would love to ask you questions all night, but I've been told that we wanted the audience to throw some at you. Yes, you right there.
I just want to know, you had to do research or you ended up, think that you had to do any kind of research or interview any of the Landmans in the area of Texas before you end up playing this character, and how long did you have?
That's a good question. I tend to only do research on technical stuff. I like to play the person just the way I would do it. So we were fortunate enough to have Taylor and Christian Wallace, who had the podcast, he did the podcast this was based on. And Christian was on the set all the time. He and his family all worked in the oil business. So I didn't read a bunch of books beforehand or any of that kind of thing. I knew Christian was there, and if there was something that I needed to know the meaning of, I would ask him because he knew the answer. And when you're an actor, when you're just memorizing lines and you spout them off in terms of technical stuff, people are not stupid. They see that. So I wanted to know what everything meant. And I knew some stuff. I mean, I had two friends whose dads were landmen, and I knew some people that worked in the oil business, actually in the fields. But there were technical things that I didn't know sometimes. And I would just go to Christian, because he was there all the time, and ask him and say, what exactly does this mean? That way, when I say that to somebody, I know what I'm talking about. And so that was really helpful to have someone who had actually worked in the oil fields on the set all the time. But I didn't sit around and read a bunch of books because, when you have dyslexia, that's hard to start with.
Yeah. Let's see. You right there.
I love the show, and I want to ask you because it's relationship and character driven, and it's so great to see it, and you feel the heart, the love of it. How did you and Allie and the two that play your children get that? It's like your family. Like, I believe you're just, and even the screaming picture on the phone, that's like perfect. So how long did it take you to get that facility to be, familiar like that?
But I've been married 6 times. Fortunately, the last one stuck. Connie and I have been together for 22 years. But, sometimes, as you know, you get thrown into situations with people you don't know. I knew John Hamm and I had met each other in St. Louis at an all-star game because we're both Cardinal fans. And except for I root for the Dodgers unless they're playing the Cardinals. But, and how cool is that, by the way?
Not very.
No, I know you don't like that. The East Coast guy here, ladies and gentlemen. But anyway, sometimes you get thrown into these situations in a movie where you don't know someone. So John and I had met before, didn't know each other well, never hung out together. Demi and I had known each other since 1990, 91, something like that. But I didn't know Allie, I didn't know Jacob, and I didn't know Michelle. There was something about it as soon as we met, because Taylor had the foresight to cast people who were right for the parts. And I mean, like I said before, Michelle, that's easy. 20-year-old daughter, be protective of her. Yes, I get it. And Jacob is actually from Arkansas, where I grew up. And he and I talked about those days, before we started, And Allie just comes in the room like, it's like, oh my God, what just happened? so it was so easy to develop that relationship, and she's very open, and I don't know how to tell you other than the chemistry was right from the beginning. And sometimes you get it where it's not, and you have to work on it. And sometimes it never works. But in this case, we were very lucky that the people who played the family got each other right away. Yeah, and great question, by the way.
So we've got time for one more.
3 more.
Oh, 3 more. And then I got a last one myself. You right there in the center.
Hi. So I've been watching you forever, and I just hearing this conversation now, I watched all of Goliath. And when I came to see this, and I thought, oh, this is going to be good. And now it's almost like how you own this part and the things that you've done in this were so like, oh my God, this the scene where she says to you, we're having sex, like the look on your face, there was so much humor I wasn't expecting to find, right? But I'm curious, just from what you've spoken about, where did you find the lawyer part for Goliath? Because here you're talking about having been and seen, and it really just, now that's who you're going to be in my head now, Goliath. But I'm just curious, where in your jobs you found in that lawyer argumentative kind of essence for yourself?
Okay, so when my wife and I argue, we're both like lawyers. It's like, well, you stated yesterday that when you went to Wizen Market in Agora Hills, that you went into an antique shop, and yet I went into that antique shop, and they know me very well, and they didn't mention you. So how do you explain that? So, no, I honestly, I played the part in Goliath as if I were a lawyer in L.A. If I were a lawyer in L.A., that's pretty much what I'd be. It goes back to the thing about being yourself and everything. I mean, you could be playing something that seems far away from you, but if you put yourself into it, it's going to be your strongest work. And so I just played that character in Goliath as if I were a lawyer, because I don't like, what, you didn't like Goliath? Why are you leaving? If you have to pee, I get it.
Well, now,
But yeah, I just once again, it's like in Landman, I played me as if I were a landman, that's kind of what it would be. If I were a lawyer in L.A., that's kind of the guy I would be. So I try to take parts that are things that that are natural for me. I just don't take parts that are not in my wheelhouse. And I'm known for playing all these different kinds of things, but if you boil it down, they're all in my wheelhouse. I mean, from anything I've ever done. If I could put 2 movies together that probably are me, The Man Who Wasn't There, a guy who doesn't really understand why he's here, and A Simple Plan, an innocent, and so, if I were going to be a lawyer, I'd be pretty pissed off at pharmaceutical companies. And so I can put myself into that idea, But I'm glad you liked that. I'm glad you liked Goliath. Yeah, I loved it. Yeah.
all right, well, I'm going to go 2 more.
On the end there. That's
So what was your favorite part about your character?
My favorite part about my character was the fact that I was under pressure every moment and still had a sense of humor about it. I think that was probably it. Yeah.
Well, you were right to open this up for questions. It's great. All right, so let's go with one more. Let's see here. I'm sorry, I'm blind as a bat. You, the lady right there who just stood up.
Boldness works.
I saw you were pointing. I'm Raisa. Thank you so much for being here. And I was just wondering, since you're speaking to, obviously, a bunch of actors, what is the one thing, like the most important thing that you've learned from being on the set of The Landman? And what's something that's very important and has affected your craft that you learned on set in general in life?
Well, the thing that I learned on set with Landman is that if you have a good crew around you with people who are there to make the same thing, where you all have this singular vision, because this was an amazing crew. I mean, they couldn't have been better. I've never worked with one better. And when you make that environment right, then it allows you to have this freedom, you know, and when you're with people who are happy to be there, and it's not that I haven't seen that before, but this one really hit home with me, that everybody was there because they wanted to be. Nobody was there to do a job. They were there to actually be these people and have fun with each other and cry with each other and all that kind of thing. So I think that was really the main thing I learned, is that, wow, I'm with an entire group who's looking at the same thing, you know? And maybe I've been near that before, but not quite like this. And in general, I was raised by my two mentors, you know, as older guys who kind of raised me up and, you know, in this kind of thing, because I grew up in the music business and I became successful as an actor in my mid-late 30s, so, which is probably a good thing, because if I'd got an Academy Award when I was 19, I probably wouldn't be here. I had some problems in the old days, but I was raised up by Robert Duvall and Bruce Dern. And I would say, in general, I've learned to never stop being a fan. Don't let jealousy creep into your craft and into your career. It's like, you know, like I mentioned Tom Cruise earlier, Tom Hanks. You know, these are guys I know. You know, I don't get jealous when Tom Hanks gets a role that I wish I could have played, you know. It happens. Just keep doing what you do, you know. And also this thing that they tell you in acting, and Duvall taught me this is pretty funny. I like this. He said one time, there was this actor that he and I both aren't crazy about, okay? Well, it's not that we're not crazy about the person. I don't really know him, you know, and Duvall doesn't really know him either. I mean, we run into each other, but someone really famous who they say, you're supposed to be subtle. Well, you're not always supposed to be subtle. I mean, look at some politicians, for instance. They're not subtle. So sometimes if you're playing somebody like that, you don't have to be subtle. And Duvall said to me one time, he goes, Billy, there's a thin line between subtle and boring. And I was like, yeah, that's true, isn't it? And so subtle doesn't necessarily mean great. And over the top doesn't necessarily mean bad. You do what you feel in the moment. And I was taught that by some masters, you know. And so I would say the thing I've learned on sets over the years is when you feel it, just do it. And if it doesn't work, that's fine, you know. But most of the time, if you feel it and you do it, it does work. So I'd say that's the thing I learned the most, yeah.
I've got one last question. When I was researching this, you know, you fit into these roles and you just melt into them and make them your own. But I'm a big fan of some of the movies where you put more of yourself into the writing and directing. And I'm talking about Sling Blade, and I'm talking about the long cut of All the Pretty Horses. And I read that you that you came out of that experience so bruised that maybe that's why you don't get behind the camera as much anymore. And I have to say, just personally, you have as much stuff to say as anybody working out there. Is it possible that we'll see you step back into that mode and in that way?
Well, I want to so bad. I really do. I would like to write something else and direct something else. And I love actors. I love to put them in places where they fit and stuff. But I think the stories that I have to tell, because my writing, really came from novels. I wasn't influenced by screenwriters. I was influenced by novelists, and particularly Steinbeck and Flannery O'Connor and Erskine Caldwell and people like that. William and John Faulkner. And Hemingway, people like that. So I just think that I'm irrelevant as a writer and director these days. I don't think my stuff would be, I think if I tried to get Sling Blade made these days, it would never get made. I happened to make it at the time when there was an independent film boom and people accepted that. But now, we're all addicted to our phones and our computers, and I just don't know if I can actually make a movie where I have to cast a telephone. So, I don't know. I just think that literature has kind of gone by the wayside, at least in theatrical movies. I think streaming is the place to be now because you're making 10-hour movies. How many directors have gone into the producers or the studio and said, the movie has to be 3 hours and 45 minutes? The studio said, no, it has to be an hour and 32 minutes. Well, now in streaming, directors can make a 10-hour movie, and an actor has 10 hours to develop a character. Everything we ever dreamed of, and we used to be afraid of television because it meant your career was on the skids and you're going to end up on Hollywood Squares or whatever. Now, it's not like that anymore, because the difference between television and theatrical movies was censorship. So there's no censorship in streaming. So why is streaming not just a 10-hour movie? Of course it is. And that might be more appealing to me. But the thing is when you direct a movie, it takes 1.5 years out of your life. Yeah. I'm 37 years old, dude. I don't have that much time left.
37.
So,
you went through 6 wives in 37 years. You're a
well,
machine.
Yeah. Well, I was raised in Arkansas. We got married when we were 11, but anyway. But yeah, I mean, look, I would love to write and direct another movie. I really would. I'm just afraid of it because when I did All the Pretty Horses, I did 2 other movies that nobody's ever seen. One was called Daddy and Them, and one was called Jane Mansfield's Car. Nobody saw them, and the critics who saw them hated them because they didn't understand them. And then later, I walked down the street, and everybody loves both of those movies. Roger Ebert, God rest his soul, who was very good to me. When he hated something I did, I usually agreed with him. He was an awesome guy. And so one of his dreams was to see the full cut of All the Pretty Horses, which never happened. But there is talk now of us actually coming back and putting that together again and putting Dan's score back in and putting it out. So,
wow, isn't that something? Well, this was wonderful, and I thank you all for being such a captive audience. And Billy Bob, just what can I say?